And now to a rare look inside a wing of Buckingham Palace, rarely seen by the public. King Charles is now opening it up to visitors for the very first time.
Behind the grand gates of Buckingham Palace lies a world few ever see, filled with secrets, silent conflicts, and hidden decisions that shaped history. From royal scandals to untold struggles inside the crown, the truth is far deeper than the polished image shown to the world. What if everything you thought you knew about the royal family is only half the story? Join us to find out. Number 20. The palace is not just a home. It is a power machine. Buckingham Palace looks like a postcard. Gold gates, royal guards, and a silence that feels almost sacred. But behind that image sits something far more complex. It is not just a residence. It is a working machine of monarchy, politics, and public perception. For centuries, the palace has operated like a controlled stage where every appearance, every statement, and every silence is carefully managed. Nothing is truly casual. Even a smile from a balcony can be part of a larger strategy about stability and national identity. But what most people never realize is how much pressure sits inside those walls. Staff operate under extreme confidentiality. Decisions are filtered through layers of advisors. Even family moments are shaped by institutional expectations. And when mistakes happen, they are rarely seen as personal. They are treated as risks to the crown itself. This is why the palace is often described not as a home, but as an institution that protects itself first. And that protection has shaped every major crisis in modern royal history. But the deeper we go, the more one question appears. How far does that protection really go when things start falling apart inside the family itself? And that is where everything begins to shift. Because behind the polished image, history has already shown cracks forming long before the public ever notices. And the first major crack came from a king who chose love over the throne, which changed everything that followed. Number 19, the abdication that stunned the monarchy. In 1936, the monarchy faced a moment it still does not fully escape. King Edward VIII chose love over duty, stepping away from the throne to marry Wallis Simpson. It was not just a romantic decision. It was a constitutional earthquake. Buckingham Palace had to react fast. The institution that is built on continuity suddenly faced a break in its own bloodline direction. Public messaging was tightly controlled. The narrative was shaped to protect the monarchy from appearing unstable. But behind closed doors, the shock was deeper than public statements suggested. A king leaving the throne voluntarily was almost unthinkable at the time. It forced the royal system to rewire itself instantly. Edward's departure also left emotional and political tension inside the family. His relationship with his brother, who became King George VI, carried the weight of responsibility placed on reluctant shoulders. What the public saw was a smooth transition. What the palace managed was damage control at the highest level. But controlling the image requires more than tradition. It requires control of information itself. And that raises a question that never really went away. If one king could be erased from the throne for breaking tradition, what else could be hidden or reshaped to protect the crown? That question leads directly into how the palace handles truth itself. And that is where the next layer begins. Number 18. Control of information became survival strategy. After the abdication crisis, Buckingham Palace did not just adjust its leadership. It adjusted its entire relationship with information. Over time, a pattern became clear. The monarchy does not simply respond to events. It manages how events are seen. This is not unusual for institutions of power, but in the royal context, it becomes almost absolute. Statements are carefully worded. Silence is often strategic. The royal press system developed into a tightly coordinated structure. Journalists often rely on palace briefings, while the palace relies on controlled access to maintain influence over narratives. Critics argue this creates a system where truth is not always the first priority. Stability is. That does not mean facts are invented. It means facts are filtered, delayed, or shaped in presentation. Over decades, this approach has helped the monarchy survive wars, scandals, and political shifts. But it has also created suspicion whenever silence is longer than expected. Because in a world of instant media, silence itself becomes a message. and Buckingham Palace has mastered that language better than almost any institution in modern history. But control over information becomes most tested when the public demands transparency, and no period tested them more than the years that brought the monarchy into global celebrity culture. A culture that would collide directly with one of the most famous royal stories ever told. And that story begins with a princess who changed everything. Number 17. Princess Diana and the breakdown of royal trust. When Princess Diana entered the royal family, she was instantly embraced by the public, but behind palace doors, her story became one of the most examined and emotionally charged chapters in modern royal history. Her marriage to Prince Charles was presented as a fairy tale, but over time, the reality became publicly complicated. The breakdown of their relationship played out in a way that the monarchy had never faced before. Unlike earlier eras, this was not hidden. It was broadcast, photographed, and discussed globally. Buckingham Palace was forced into constant crisis management. Every statement carried weight. Every silence carried interpretation. Diana's popularity with the public created an unusual dynamic. For the first time, public sympathy often leaned away from the institution and toward an individual inside it. The famous interview, where Diana spoke openly about her struggles, became one of the most defining media moments in royal history. It reshaped global perception and forced internal reflection within the palace system. The monarchy responded with restraint, but also with recalibration of how future personal matters would be handled. Behind the scenes, it became clear that emotional narratives could no longer be controlled in the way they once were. And when Diana's life ended in 1997, the world reaction placed Buckingham Palace under intense scrutiny once again, especially regarding its public response in the days immediately after. That moment became a lasting reference point in discussions about empathy, protocol, and public expectation. But Diana was not the end of royal controversy. She was the beginning of a modern era where every royal action could become global news within seconds. And that shift would later collide with a very different kind of royal crisis. One tied not to romance, but to reputation on an international scale. And that is where the next truth begins. Number 16. The modern press machine and royal image warfare. Buckingham Palace has always had a relationship with the press, but in the modern era, that relationship became far more complex. It is no longer just about newspapers. It is about global media ecosystems, social platforms, and 24-hour news cycles. To manage this, the royal communication system evolved into something highly strategic. Information is released in carefully timed waves. Photographs are selected with intention. Public appearances are choreographed to reinforce continuity and stability. But critics argue this creates a controlled version of reality. Supporters argue it protects an institution that represents national identity. Both perspectives exist at the same time, which is why the monarchy remains such a powerful subject of global fascination. What is clear is that Buckingham Palace operates like a media-aware institution. It understands timing, symbolism, and emotional tone. However, this level of control is constantly challenged by independent journalism and public speculation. In the digital age, narratives no longer remain contained. They spread, evolve, and often escape official framing entirely. This has led to moments where the palace appears reactive rather than fully in control, especially during fast-moving controversies. And as media scrutiny intensified, new kinds of royal crises emerged. Not just personal scandals, but reputational ones involving global figures, legal investigations, and international attention. One of the most serious of these would eventually involve a royal connection that drew worldwide headlines, and it forced the palace into one of its most difficult public positions in recent history. That story changes everything again, and it begins with a scandal that did not stay in the shadows. It became global. Number 15. Prince Andrew and the scandal that stunned the palace. For Buckingham Palace, few modern crises have hit as hard or lingered as long as the controversy surrounding Prince Andrew. What started as distant rumors and uncomfortable associations eventually developed into a global headline story that refused to fade away, no matter how carefully it was managed. The connection to Jeffrey Epstein placed the monarchy in an unfamiliar position. This was not a historical issue buried in the past. It was a modern, fast-moving media storm unfolding in real time across television, newspapers, and social platforms all at once. As legal scrutiny and public attention increased, Buckingham Palace was forced into a difficult position. Any response risked intensifying the story, but silence also invited interpretation. So the approach became tightly controlled communication, with brief statements and limited detail. Eventually, Prince Andrew stepped back from royal duties, a decision widely understood as an attempt to contain institutional damage rather than escalate attention further. Public appearances reduced, and his role within official royal life effectively changed overnight. What made the situation especially significant was not only the allegations themselves, but how globally visible the entire process became. Every development was instantly analyzed. And once a private issue becomes a public global narrative, control is never fully regained. Number 14, the money. Question that never goes away. Buckingham Palace is not just a symbol of monarchy. It is also part of a financial system that has always invited curiosity, debate, and sometimes frustration. At the center of it is the sovereign grant, public funding that supports official royal duties, security, and the upkeep of royal residences. In return, the royal family carries out ceremonial roles that represent the nation at home and abroad. But the real tension has never been about whether the monarchy costs money. It is about how clearly the money is understood. Critics have long questioned how transparent the full financial picture really is, especially when it comes to private royal wealth, estates, and income streams that sit outside public funding. Supporters argue the monarchy delivers cultural value, diplomatic presence, and national identity that cannot be measured purely in financial terms. Critics argue that modern institutions funded partly by taxpayers should operate with higher levels of openness. Over time, this debate has stopped being just about figures. It has become about trust, fairness, and accountability in a modern democracy. And every time the palace enters public conversation, the same question quietly returns. If the monarchy is funded in part by the public, how much of its financial reality is truly visible behind the royal image? Number 13, family tensions that become public stories. Inside Buckingham Palace, the idea of family is always complicated. On the surface, everything is polished, structured, and deeply formal. But behind that structure, there are still personal relationships, disagreements, and emotional distance that come with any long-standing family system placed under constant pressure. The difference is that in the royal world, nothing stays fully private forever. Even the smallest sign of tension can become public conversation when viewed through the lens of media attention and speculation. A missed appearance, a different seating arrangement, or a brief change in body language can quickly become interpreted as something much larger than it is. Buckingham Palace rarely responds directly to such interpretations. Instead, it relies on silence, formality, and carefully controlled public moments. That silence, however, often creates space for more speculation rather than less. Over time, this has created a unique situation where perception sometimes grows faster than confirmation. The public reads patterns into moments that may simply be routine, while the institution continues to project unity through official appearances. This constant gap between internal reality and external interpretation is part of modern royal life. It is not always dramatic, but it is always present. And whenever that gap widens, attention naturally shifts to how the monarchy handles its most important transition moments, where unity is tested in the most visible way possible. Number 12, succession pressure and the weight of the crown. The line of succession inside Buckingham Palace looks simple on paper, a clear order of who becomes next. But inside the reality of the monarchy, it is not just a list. It is a lifelong condition of expectation, preparation, and quiet pressure that never fully switches off. From childhood, those closest to the throne are raised under constant visibility. Every public appearance is not just a moment. It is part of a long-term image being shaped for a future role. Mistakes are not treated as ordinary mistakes. They are studied, discussed, and remembered in ways most people never experience. The palace prepares for succession like a carefully managed transition of power, ensuring continuity at all costs. But even with all the planning, emotional reality cannot be fully controlled. Each change of monarch carries history, memory, and public emotion with it. And in the modern world, that transition is no longer quiet. It is global, immediate, and constantly analyzed in real time. Social media, news cycles, and public commentary turn what was once private adjustment into worldwide conversation. This creates a unique burden. The crown is not just inherited, it is performed under global observation. And that is where the deeper question begins. What does it truly mean to grow up knowing your entire life is a preparation for a role you may never fully choose, but are expected to embody completely? Number 11, public perception. As a power force, Buckingham Palace does not just manage a monarchy, it manages a mirror, and that mirror is public perception. Unlike laws or titles, perception is unpredictable. It shifts with emotion, timing, and global attention, often faster than any official statement can respond. From the outside, it can look like the royal family controls its image completely, but in reality, perception has its own momentum. A single photograph, a brief comment, or even an absence from an event can spark worldwide interpretation. Once that interpretation begins, it spreads on its own terms. This is why the palace places so much emphasis on timing and presentation. Every appearance is planned, every message carefully structured. Yet even with that precision, meaning is never fully guaranteed. Sometimes the public sees unity, sometimes it sees distance, and sometimes it sees conflict, where none is officially confirmed. That gap between intention and interpretation is where modern royal challenges live. Because once perception forms, it becomes difficult to reshape without reinforcing it further. And in today's media world, perception does not wait for explanation. It reacts instantly, moves globally, and often defines the story before the palace even speaks. And when perception escapes control, it creates pressure that leads directly into the next layer of royal reality. Number 10, the palace and the press. A relationship of necessity. The relationship between Buckingham Palace and the press is not simple friendship or open hostility. It is more like a carefully balanced exchange where both sides need each other, but neither fully trusts the other. On one side, the monarchy depends on the media to remain visible. Without constant coverage, royal ceremonies, tours, and public duties would lose much of their impact. On the other side, the press depends on the royal family as one of the most powerful and consistent sources of global attention. Over decades, this has created a system built on access, timing, and influence. Journalists receive briefings and official updates, while the palace carefully manages what information is released and when. But this balance is always under pressure. The palace wants stability and dignity in every story. The media wants speed, detail, and emotional depth. Because of this tension, communication is often tightly controlled. Even small announcements are prepared with careful wording to avoid misinterpretation. Still, in today's digital world, control is never absolute. Once information is released, it spreads instantly and takes on its own life. And that is where the next challenge begins, because controlling the message is no longer enough. Number 9, privacy and duty. The constant struggle. Inside Buckingham Palace, the concept of privacy is not absolute. It is conditional. Members of the royal family are expected to maintain public visibility while also protecting personal boundaries. This creates a constant balancing act. Every private moment carries potential public significance. Every public moment carries private consequences. The tension between personal life and institutional duty has shaped many of the monarchy's modern challenges. Unlike most public figures, royal family members do not simply manage image. They manage identity within a constitutional framework. This means that even personal decisions can have institutional implications. Over time, this has led to careful structuring of public appearances, interviews, and official engagements. But despite this structure, privacy remains one of the most contested aspects of royal life. Because in a media-driven world, the boundary between private and public is increasingly thin, and Buckingham Palace exists directly on that boundary. At times, the institution has taken strong positions on privacy protection. At other times, it has adapted to changing expectations of openness. This ongoing tension reflects a deeper reality. The monarchy must remain visible to survive, but protected to function. Those two requirements are not always compatible. And when they clash, decisions become more complex than they appear externally. Because behind every public appearance is a calculation, and behind every silence is a choice. Which leads to another layer of royal life that often remains unseen: the people who work inside the palace itself. Number 8. The palace staff and the invisible workforce. Buckingham Palace is not only home to royalty, it is also a workplace for hundreds of staff members who maintain daily operations behind the scenes. From household management to communications, logistics, and ceremonial preparation, the workforce operates with high levels of discretion and professionalism. Much of their work is invisible to the public, yet essential to maintaining the function of the monarchy. Staff are expected to uphold confidentiality, precision, and consistency in an environment where even small details can carry symbolic importance. Over time, reports and accounts from former staff have suggested that working within the palace requires adaptation to a highly structured and hierarchical system. However, it is also described as deeply traditional, with strong emphasis on duty and service. Because of confidentiality expectations, very little is publicly confirmed about internal working culture. What is known is that the institution depends heavily on continuity and trust within its staff system. When staff change or leave, transitions are managed carefully to preserve stability. This hidden workforce plays a crucial role in maintaining the public image of the monarchy. Without it, the ceremonial and administrative structure of the palace would not function at its current scale. Yet, despite its importance, it remains one of the least visible aspects of royal life. And that invisibility contributes to the mystique of Buckingham Palace, because the less the public sees, the more it speculates. And speculation often grows strongest around what is least understood. Which brings us to another recurring theme: security, secrecy, and protection. Because in a building that represents a nation, safety is not optional, it is essential. Number 7. Security and the illusion of invulnerability. Buckingham Palace is one of the most secure buildings in the world, protected by layers of physical security, surveillance, and trained personnel. However, history shows that no system is entirely immune to breach. Over time, there have been notable incidents that tested palace security protocols and led to reassessments of protective measures. Each incident reinforced the reality that visibility also creates vulnerability. Because the palace is not hidden. It is located in the heart of a global city, accessible in public view, and constantly surrounded by visitors. This combination of openness and protection creates a unique security challenge. The institution must remain symbolic and visible, while also maintaining strict safety standards. In response, security measures have evolved significantly over time, incorporating modern technology and coordinated planning. But beyond physical protection, there is also informational security. Control over sensitive details, internal operations, and personal privacy remains a key part of royal protection strategy. Because in the digital age, information can travel faster than physical threats, and once released, it cannot be contained. This makes confidentiality not just a tradition, but a necessity. Yet, despite all precautions, perception of vulnerability still exists whenever an incident becomes public, because symbolism matters as much as reality. And when symbolism is disrupted, even briefly, it becomes part of the narrative. Which leads into another important truth. The monarchy is not only about protection from external forces, it is also about adapting internally to survive modern expectations. Number 6. Modernization versus tradition. The internal struggle. Buckingham Palace exists in a constant negotiation between tradition and modernization. This is not a new struggle, but in the modern era, it has become more visible and more complex. Tradition represents continuity, stability, and historical identity. Modernization represents relevance, accessibility, and public engagement. Balancing both is one of the monarchy's most persistent challenges. Over time, the institution has introduced gradual changes in communication, public presence, and engagement with contemporary media. However, these changes are often carefully measured to avoid disrupting long-standing protocols. Because in royal life, change is not only functional, it is symbolic. Every adjustment can be interpreted as a shift in identity. This makes modernization a sensitive process, Too little change risks appearing outdated. Too much change risks appearing unstable. Buckingham Palace must navigate this tension continuously. In recent decades, this has become even more important due to global media visibility and shifting public expectations. Younger generations engage with the monarchy differently than previous ones, which adds another layer of complexity to institutional planning. As a result, the royal system often moves slowly, prioritizing stability over speed. But in a fast-moving world, that approach is constantly tested, and each decision becomes part of a larger conversation about the future of monarchy itself, because ultimately the institution is not just preserving history, it is trying to remain part of the present. And that challenge never fully ends, which brings us closer to the final layers of this story, where perception, legacy, and survival all come together. Stay with us. Number 5. The power of symbolism and national identity. Buckingham Palace is more than a residence. It is a national symbol. For many, it represents continuity, tradition, and historical identity that stretches across centuries. This symbolic role gives the monarchy a unique position in public life. Unlike political institutions, it does not govern through policy. It governs through presence. Ceremonies, public appearances, and national events all reinforce this symbolic function. Because symbolism is powerful, it must be carefully maintained. Every visual detail, from uniforms to architecture, contributes to the broader perception of stability. This is why Buckingham Palace is often described as a living symbol rather than just a building. It represents continuity across generations, even as society changes around it. However, symbolism also creates expectations. The public does not just observe the monarchy, it interprets it. And interpretation can vary widely depending on context, culture, and timing. This means the palace must constantly manage not only reality, but meaning. Because meaning is what people remember, and memory is what shapes legacy, which leads directly into the final dimension of this story. Not what the monarchy is today, but what it will be remembered as. Number 4, legacy and the question of history. Every monarchy is ultimately measured by legacy. Buckingham Palace stands at the center of a living historical narrative that is still unfolding. Legacy is shaped not only by achievements, but by how events are remembered, interpreted, and recorded over time. This makes historical framing extremely important. What is emphasized, what is minimized, and what is remembered differently all contribute to long-term perception. Over centuries, the British monarchy has evolved through wars, reforms, cultural shifts, and global transformation. Each era adds another layer to its legacies. But unlike static history, this legacy is still active. It continues to develop in real time. This creates a unique situation where the institution is both subject and author of its own historical narrative, because it participates in shaping how it is seen. Yet it cannot fully control how it is ultimately remembered. And that uncertainty is part of its endurance. Legacy is not just about preserving the past, it is about surviving interpretation. And interpretation is always changing. Which brings us to the final threads of this narrative, where survival itself becomes the central question. Number 3, survival through adaptation. The longevity of Buckingham Palace is not accidental. It is the result of continuous adaptation across centuries. From constitutional changes to cultural shifts, the monarchy has survived by adjusting without fully losing its core identity. This ability to adapt is one of its defining characteristics. However, adaptation is not always visible in real time. It often appears gradual, even subtle. Behind public tradition, there is ongoing internal adjustment to modern expectations, technology, and global perception. This allows the institution to remain relevant without abandoning its symbolic foundation. But survival also depends on resilience. Because every era brings new challenges, and each challenge tests the balance between tradition and change, the monarchy does not exist outside history. It moves through it, and as long as it continues to adapt, it continues to exist. But adaptation alone is not the final answer, because perception ultimately decides meaning, and meaning determines relevance, which leads to the final reflection, the one that ties everything together. Number 2, the line between reality and perception. Buckingham Palace exists in a space where reality and perception constantly interact. What is real is not always what is seen, and what is seen is not always fully explained. This dynamic creates a permanent tension between transparency and tradition. The monarchy operates within this tension, balancing openness with restraint. For the public, this creates fascination. For the institution, it creates responsibility. Because perception can shape trust as much as fact, and trust is the foundation of monarchy. Over time, this has made communication one of the most important aspects of royal life, not just what is said, but how it is understood. Because in the modern world, meaning travels faster than explanation, and once meaning forms, it is difficult to reshape. This is why Buckingham Palace often moves carefully in public communication. Because every message is not just information, it is interpretation in motion, and interpretation becomes history. Which brings us to the final layer of this entire story, the question that remains after everything is examined. So, number 1. The question that never fully disappears. But after all the history, the scandals, the silence, the adaptation, and the symbolism, one question continues to follow Buckingham Palace through every era. How much of what is seen is the full story, and how much is shaped by necessity, tradition, and control? The monarchy has survived because it understands timing, perception, and restraint. It has also endured because it evolves without losing its identity. But it remains one of the few institutions in the world where meaning is as important as action, and that meaning is constantly negotiated between past and present, public and private, tradition and modernity. Buckingham Palace is not just a building filled with history. It is a living system of narrative, symbolism, and continuity. And as long as it exists, it will continue to generate questions. Not because answers are missing, but because interpretation is endless. And that is what keeps the story alive. Now that you have seen the hidden truth behind Buckingham Palace, what stands out to you the most about the monarchy and its secrets? Share your thoughts in the comments below.